Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here with us today. We appreciate it very much. Tim Andersen here, the appraiser's advocate. We're here with one of the movers and shakers of the real estate appraisal industry, Mr. Graig Morley. Craig, how are you this morning?
Good morning, Tim, and everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning.
Craig, thank you. Now, we want to set the stage. Craig is very influential nationally in real estate appraisal, but he is here today as Craig, a state certified general real estate appraiser in 3 states. He is not here in his capacity with NAR. He is not here in his capacity with the state of Utah. He's not here in his capacity with the National Association of Appraisers. And most assuredly, he is not here in his capacity as a member of the Appraisal Standards Board. As always in these interviews, it's just Craig. And so, just Craig, we're glad you're here. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Thank you, Tim.
Okay. Now, Craig, we have spoken numerous times off the air about various topics. And in fact, that's how we choose topics for these interviews. And you indicated that something has come up recently relative to accepting assignments. Now, appraisers tend to be conditioned to accept assignments, period. The assignment comes, you get the email assignment, you accept it, period, end of sentence. And you work it into the schedule, and you assign it to somebody, and you open a file and you start the research, and you just accept assignments, period. You just don't say no. But given what you have learned recently, maybe that's a protocol that we might want to re-examine. What's going on here?
Well, there's a number of different situations that we find. We see that many of the appraisal assignments are being offered through a portal, email, or you can even have an automatic system right now with United Wholesale Mortgage. If you are signed up with through ANOW, you can get these assignments coming through, and it's a beautiful thing. It's pretty easy to get the assignments. The challenge I think that we sometimes face is, when should I accept the assignment and when should I not? Am I competent to perform the assignment? Is the fee commensurate with the scope of work that's required to complete the assignment? Am I doing things that ultimately are going to result in some kind of unintended consequence that's going to find me in difficulty with a licensing board? And so we have seen situations where people can get set up for an auto accept on an email assignment offer, and we see sometimes people that just accept everything that comes in the door, regardless of what the fee is or the turn time, and it has the potential of creating some problems. And so I thought it might be interesting to talk about when should I not accept the assignment, and maybe what are some of the criteria or the conditions that would result in it being more appropriate to pass on a particular assignment. So that was the idea that I thought might be of interest to those who are trying to better their appraisal skills and figure out how best to develop a thriving appraisal practice.
Okay, all right. Thriving appraisal practice. Okay, we all like thriving appraisal practices because we like money and we appreciate the cash flow. All right, let's talk about a thriving appraisal practice. Now, how can your appraisal practice thrive if, when an assignment comes in, you go, no, I don't want that one. We're not going to accept that one. Isn't that how appraisers interpret a thriving appraisal practice? They're 6 weeks behind and are working 14 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Well, I guess it depends on how you define the thriving appraisal practice, but To my way of thinking, the appraisal practice that makes the most sense to me is the one where I generate as much income as I can with as little expense and resulting difficulty as possible. And I think oftentimes, the old idea of supply and demand is that if I've got more work than I can do, then that suggests to me that I may need to consider reevaluating how much I'm charging for the services that I provide. And oftentimes, and this has been kind of an ongoing challenge, is that we sometimes think that the fee dictates the amount of work we put into the assignment. And the reality is that the complexity of the assignment should really dictate how much I'm charging for the services that I provide. And so we have seen countless situations where people get hauled in before the appraisal board and they said, well, gee, they were only paying me a couple $100 to do this assignment. So I didn't do as much work as I would have had they paid me more. And in those kinds of situations, that's the first situation where you turn down the assignment. And we find in our office that most of these appraisal management companies are willing to look at bids. I want to give them a realistic fee for the service that I'm providing, and that fee might become a function of how busy am I. And I want to give them a realistic turn time. How long is it realistically going to take me to provide this thing so that I don't have the constant, perpetual phone calls and emails asking, where's this assignment? You're late. And I know one of the things that we've done in our office, and we've got some staff that kind of helps. We've got a number of appraisers that we share space, and essentially what we do is we determine how much time does it take to complete the assignment? How many appraisals can I get done in a day or a week? And then my secretary tracks the how many days out I am based on the number of assignments that I can physically perform. And then when they quote these, and we almost have to rebid almost everything to give an appropriate fee and appropriate turn time. And when we do that, we don't get all of the assignments, which is okay because we've got enough work to where I don't want to be dealing with all of the follow-up correspondence that is usually associated with not being able to perform what I said I was going to be able to do. I would rather have it done before before the expected date than after, and having people frustrated and upset. And the reality is to be able to do that, sometimes it's a result of charging a little more for your services so that the work you do get produces the maximum amount of income for the services that we're going to be providing.
Okay, Craig, so far you've raised some issues. You've raised the issue of, is the fee commensurate with the amount of work that the appraisal is going to take? And then you've raised scope of work issues. From a standpoint of, obviously we're not going to talk about fees themselves, but from a standpoint of what to charge fairly and properly, and obviously with a profit. You're saying that you get this email blast and it says you got 30 seconds to accept or reject the offer, or 30 minutes, or whatever it is. Does that really give an appraiser time to look into the job so they can determine the scope of work necessary to appraise the property credibly and still provide themselves with a profit? So is that when something comes in with just an absolutely ridiculously low fee, is that something the appraiser should reject outright? Or is that something the appraiser should take a few minutes to, for lack of a better word, study to see if the appraisal can profitably done for that fee? And if it can't, to respond with a proper fee that properly rewards the appraiser for the time, effort, and risk the appraiser is going to have to take to complete the job credibly?
Yeah, our approach has always been is to rebid. We want to keep clients. We want them to know that we're interested in their work. Now, there's some clients that that we encounter that we just their requirements are just beyond what we're willing to perform. But generally speaking, if they reach out to us, we're going to tell them what we can provide for them. And if it doesn't meet their timetables and things, then that's fine. And oftentimes the fees that we come back with are significantly higher, and they don't accept it, and that's okay. But oftentimes it's surprising how sometimes they will come back and say, okay, this will work. I think the difficulty, on a few years ago, we were having a blast where the solicitation for the assignment would go out to multiple appraisers, and the first appraiser to hit the button that says yes was the one who got the assignment. And we actually went to the state appraisal board and said, listen, we think that this is unprofessional practice on the part of an appraisal management company. We think that this does not allow an appraiser to determine if they're competent to perform the assignment. There's got to be a time window to be able to be able to provide accurate information. And there was some pushback from some of the appraisal management companies because that was kind of their business model, but actually got into the administrative rules for appraisal management companies that required at least a period of time to be able to analyze. And then if you don't want to do it, it automatically expires and they can roll on to the next person to be able to do that. There were several different scenarios that were developed. You don't want to put a restraint on reasonable business practice, but it became an incentive for people to accept assignments because they knew if they weren't the first one to get it, they it went to somebody else. The difficulty is that sometimes you'd end up with complex properties or properties that you had appraised before or properties that were in commercial zones that made it to where if the appraiser had not had the auto accept set up on their system, so it was automatically accepted, then you get into it and discover, gee, this is one I probably shouldn't have accepted. And I think the reality is that we need to be careful about the kind of work we accept and make sure that we haven't put ourselves in a situation that's going to compromise either our integrity or our ability to properly perform the assignment.
Graig, in raising scope of work issues, which you have done, you're implying that your scope of work starts even prior to accepting the assignment. Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, as you look at the 6 elements that are associated with determining how to solve the appraisal problem, I need to know who the intended user is, what the intended use is, who's my client, what's the value that I need to develop, what are the and figuring out the relevant characteristics, including the economic and area and subject property characteristics, so that I can appropriately determine what is it going to take to solve this client's appraisal problem that they are presenting to me. Now, if I'm doing mostly appraisal lender work, often it's pretty much the same thing, but I still have to determine if I have the capability to perform the assignment competently. And so, it's oftentimes the case where you get this and all of a sudden you discover that this property is not what it was represented to be. It's either in a commercial zone or it has large acreage, and I've got issues. I've got it. Is this surplus land? Is it excess land? What do I do if it's either one of those two things? There's an accessory dwelling unit that turns out to be something more than what you had bargained for. and they're asking me to do it, perform the assignment as a single family home, when in fact it might be a a small income rental property. And so there's oftentimes situations where as we start into the assignment that we discover that it turns out to be a little more than we thought. And oftentimes this becomes a bigger issue when it's if we're doing the desktop or the bifurcated appraisals, where you think you've got information adequate to perform the assignment and you discover that I really don't. I don't know enough about this property to provide a credible assignment result. And, so I accept a drive-by assignment and discover that there's almost no information about the property. Should I accept the assignment or not? And at what point, what's that threshold point where I say, you know what, I don't want to do this one. I just have got to change the scope of work to where I go look at it, or there's conflicting information between public records and MLS to where I don't really know the relevant characteristics of the property to a point where I can provide a result that is reasonable. And so I think that really becomes a difficult situation sometimes, but it's a critical decision that we have to make in accepting and performing these assignments. And sometimes, might even mean a situation where we walk away from a little bit of time and money because we get into it and discover it's just not something that is going to work for us.
Let me follow up, Craig. You mentioned intended user, client, assignment conditions, relevant characteristics, etc. Those are all addressed in Standard Rule 1-1, which is basically setting up so that the appraiser can understand the appraisal problem, thus be able to design a scope of work appropriate to answer that question or solve that problem credibly. So if I understand what you're saying, you are advocating the fact that maybe that first step, maybe Standard Rule 1-1 is it contains information that we've got to consider prior to accepting the assignment. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, is that we need to know what we are being engaged to perform. And that is that very first step, is in developing that appropriate scope of work to solve the problem. And how do you propose a fee for your services when you don't exactly know what it is that you are, services you're going to be providing? And realistically, at least from my perspective, I want to get paid based on the amount of time I think it's going to take me to perform the assignment. And if I have established a billing rate that I want to try to achieve, I don't always do that, but if I am doing that, then I need to look at it and say, okay, well, on this assignment, it's going to take more time. It's a little more complex than something else. I might have to engage the services of someone else to help me with this assignment. Then I need to price my fee according to what is necessary to complete this thing in a credible way.
And in doing that, it's possible that the potential client is going to say, no, that's too much money. But yet, shouldn't we be prepared for that kind of response? Shouldn't we be prepared not to take every job that comes through the front door?
Yeah, I think we pretty much have to be able to do that. If we're not doing that, we're going to find ourselves in a situation eventually where we're going to regret having accepted the assignment. And I can almost invariably tell you that if it's one of these situations that gets called before your state board, and you find yourself, even if you aren't assessed a fine, it's going to cost you more in time and heartburn and sleepless nights worrying about this stupid thing than it's worth. And so realistically, and if you get a fine, it will undoubtedly be more than whatever it is you charge for the appraisal. So you have to look at the long view on some of these business practices that we establish to make sure that we don't jeopardize our integrity and our reputation by doing things that put us in a situation to where we shouldn't have accepted assignments, and we pay the price later down the road.
Craig, in your thesis that the step one of the appraisal process, which is basically standard rule 1-1, should take place prior to agreeing to accept the assignment. Basically, what you're saying is the appraiser is going to understand when, and I guess I should say whether, an extraordinary assumption or a hypothetical condition is necessary. How is the appraiser able to figure out one or both of those basically on the fly before they accept the assignment? Because it's obvious that a lot of appraisers don't understand those two concepts. Yet what you're saying is it's incumbent on the appraiser to understand those two concepts in order to set the scope of work, and therefore in order to set an appropriate fee. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, yes. Well, and here's a common, probably there's several situations that come up commonly. Perhaps the most common is that I've got a property. Maybe I'm in a rural area or an area that is in transition or has zoning issues, to where I get this assignment and I discover that it's a residential property in a commercial zone. So I've got a multitude of questions now that I need to answer. Number one is, and we might not know this initially, but it at least initiates the conversation with the client. Is the highest and best use of this property residential or commercial? The second question I have to ask myself is, does my credential through my state licensing agency permit me to do this kind of an assignment? And thirdly, if the property is in a commercial zone, what is this going to do to the assignment? Because I have to pretty much understand the highest and best use of the property before I can develop the appropriate valuation tools or methods that I'm going to employ to solve the problem. And so if I'm a certified residential appraiser and I've got a property in a commercial zone, how do I determine what the highest and best use is if I'm not doing commercial appraisal work? And presumably, if I have a residential certification, I'm probably not doing commercial appraisal work. So I don't know if market rents for commercial applications with a modest alteration, in terms of renovation, would be the best use for this property. And so I've really got to be cautious to make sure. And I'm a certified general appraiser, and I do both residential and commercial appraisals. And I have a number of appraisers in our area when they encounter this, where they will call me and we will do a consultation. And they will say, this is the property, this is the situation, let's talk about highest and best use. And then they can reach back out to their client and say, listen, this is the situation. I believe, and I've consulted with a third party who is a certified general appraiser. I'm going to recognize their contribution in the assignment for that narrowly specified service or opinion that they've helped me develop. And we have concluded jointly that this is a residential property. The commercial zoning allows a grandfathered use for residential. There's no new commercial development taking place. If the property were placed on the market, the most likely buyer, the typical buyer, is going to be a residential home buyer. And so we will go through the elements to try to determine what's going to produce the highest return to the land. And it turns out that it's to continue as a residential property. Great. they can perform the assignment, but oftentimes you don't know that answer until you've done a little bit of work to figure that out. And if it turns out that it is in a transitional area and land values are going up dramatically, or there's high demand for some of these alternative commercial oriented uses, and I do this as a residential property, and then the lender gets this thing back and discovers that everything in the area is transitioning to commercial, I might find myself in a bind that is going to cause me some problems, either from my licensing agency or from my client for whom I've done the work. And so that becomes an issue. The second issue that we oftentimes encounter is I've got a property on a large tract of land. So now the question is this land that's beyond what's necessary to support the existing residential dwelling? Is that excess land? Is it surplus land? If it's excess land, I'm going to handle it differently than if it's surplus land. And I know in the state of Utah, we had residential appraisers that were doing land appraisals that was in zoned to allow high density development. And so now the question is, well, would somebody buy this and keep the improvements? Would they tear it down and build a new subdivision or apartment complex? And if I'm not qualified to perform that assignment, under the Appraisal Qualifications Board, a certified appraiser can appraise up to 4 units. And the state licensing board basically said, listen, if you've got land that has the highest and best use that would support more than 4 units, then it probably ought to be done by a certified general appraiser. And so that's not necessarily a USPAP issue, but it is most certainly a licensing issue. And so I need to be cautious to make sure that I haven't accepted an assignment that where the highest and best use is for, higher density multiple units or for subdivision. And how am I appropriately going to measure the contribution value of this either excess or surplus land that's associated with this house that I've been asked to appraise? And so it may require a conversation with my client explaining the situation and making sure that we are doing it appropriately and ethically. And if, sometimes they will come in and say, well, we're just making a residential loan. We don't care about this extra land. Just appraise it as though it's residential land, and we'll be fine with that. Well, okay, how do I now appropriately deal with this situation in performing the assignment? Should I even complete the assignment? And what is the appropriate way to do that? And that is something that is going to change from one assignment to the next, but it's certainly a question that needs to be answered.
Craig, thank you. That was going to be my next question. Okay, you're a state certified residential real estate appraiser. You're asked to appraise a house. You look at it on Google Earth or county records or city records or whatever. Yep, it's a house. So you bid as you would typically bid on a house. Now you get into it and you find out that yes, it's on commercial land, or yes, it's on industrial land. So you get back with the client and you tell the client what's going on. The client says, oh, don't worry about the zoning. We're just making a residential loan on it. Just appraise it as a house. So you appraise it as a house. And then the loan goes south and you notice that not only are you the defendant in a lawsuit, but the lender client has filed a complaint against you with the state for not being competent to appraise a commercial or industrial type property. And your defense is, but my client said it was okay, that I just should go ahead and do it anyway. Is that a defense, or is that just a reason to start smacking your hand with a hammer?
Yeah, probably to start smacking your hand with the hammer is probably the answer. But no, the thing that we have to remember is that the the use of hypothetical conditions and extraordinary assumptions are designed to help solve and provide flexibility in answering valuation questions that are being asked by our client. One of the problems that we sometimes encounter is that FIREA Title 11 establishes some criteria for federally insured lenders that say we don't want you making a loan on an appraisal that has a hypothetical condition. A hypothetical condition is contrary to fact. And so if I'm saying I'm making the hypothetical condition that if this property were in a residential zone, not a commercial zone, which it is currently zoned, this is what it would be worth. Well, that's fine. And you can actually do that. You can actually make a hypothetical condition on one of the four elements of highest and best use under USPAP. The question is, will my client be able to, will that work for my client? When it gets into their underwriting situation, or they come in and say, well, gee, Title 11 doesn't allow me to do that. I've got to get that question answered. And I might be in an area that is in transition. So the current zoning is residential, but everything around me starting to transition into something else. And I want to make the extraordinary assumption that it's going to stay residential. Well, do you have a reason to believe that? Is that a reasonable assumption given the nature of what's going on in the area? And that's a conversation you've got to have with your client. First of all, is say, hey, listen, this is in transition. Based on the current trend, it's very likely that they're in the middle of a annexation or something's going on that's likely to change things. And I need to make sure that I am clear, number one, what I can do legally. And number two, is it actually answering the valuation question that my client has? And so, the VA will make loans on properties that have some elements of a property that's in a commercial use, but they want it valued based on its residential contributory value. Can I do that? Well, yeah, you can, but you've got to make sure that you're clear in describing the highest and best use and the contributory value of these respective improvements and any hypothetical or extraordinary assumptions that have been made. And you've got to do it in such a way that your client, that this was at the request of my client. This is what I did to answer their valuation question. And I've got to do it in such a way that nobody is misled. And unfortunately, clicking the little box on the residential form that says the highest and best use is the current use, and leaving it at that is not going to be enough to bail you out of a situation where you've got some complexities associated with the current use and highest and best use. It's just not enough under any circumstance, but certainly in these more complex situations that we occasionally encounter.
So in other words, we can't say the client made me do it.
Well, I guess we can say whatever we want. It's whether or not we can get the people who are looking over the results to say that that's okay. And usually it's not okay.
Okay. Now, Craig, we have covered a number of topics this morning. We've talked about the conditions under when we should accept assignments, when we shouldn't accept assignments. We've talked about scope of work. We've talked about levels of licensure and what an appraiser is competent to do, given his or her level of certification from a state certification standpoint. Is there anything else you'd like to cover this morning?
Well, maybe just kind of wrap up with talking about the drive-by desktop appraisals that we are occasionally, some people do those routinely. And USPAP does not really, prohibit in any kind of, that doesn't require an inspection. what we need to do is just make sure that we've got enough information given the intended use and the intended users, and that those requirements will change from time to time. I think one of the situations that we find ourselves in is that we do the same work regardless of what the intended use or the intended or the intended users of the appraisal are. And so we probably ought to be a little more sensitive to who's my client, what do they need this appraisal for. I don't need to do as much work on a property that is owned by the client, and they're just wanting a simple answer on something. And I think sometimes we're so worried that we're going to be held up in front of some licensing board that we feel like we need to do more work on these things than maybe is necessary to solve the valuation problem. But more often the situation is usually is we haven't done enough. And so if I'm doing the hybrid bifurcated appraisals and I have to have a reason to believe that the information being presented to me is accurate, or at least accurate enough to solve the valuation problem that's associated with this assignment. And if I have conflicting information or information that's incomplete, I may need to change the scope of work so that I can perform it credibly or not complete the assignment. And it's the same thing with the drive-by. If I drive by a property and I can't see the property from the public street, I don't really know the nature of the improvements. This may be an assignment that if I can't get additional information to complete the assignment, maybe it's one I shouldn't perform, especially if there's any possibility that I haven't, made the appropriate due diligence to try to find out more information about it. It could be one of those things where you're better off not completing the assignment.
Greg, you raised the issue of, okay, you've already accepted an assignment and you get into it and you find out that either you find out that your original scope of work just wasn't sufficient to come up with a credible value conclusion. So you get back with the client and you say, look, it's going to take a whole lot more work than I thought it was. And this is what it's going to cost. The client says, no, we have a contract. We're going to hold you to it. And you better do it right. Otherwise, we're going to haul you up before your state board. Is that a situation in which maybe you want to resign from the assignment and just walk away and take a few losses here up front right now, rather than take a whole bunch of big losses a year, 18 months from now?
Well, that certainly could be the case. I think there's a difference between can I provide or can I complete the assignment competently and credibly with is it simply a matter of the financial issues with the additional time, or is there simply inadequate information for me to complete the assignment competently? And if there's inadequate information to complete the assignment competently and provide a credible assignment result, resign. That's an easy answer. Just don't do it, because it's going to likely cause you problems down the road. If it's a situation where I can complete it competently and credibly, but it's taking a lot more work than I thought it was going to, now that's a business decision. Do I want to work at a lower billing rate than I normally would to try to retain a relationship with the client? Or it's just like, you know what, if this is the way you guys are going to handle these situations, I just don't want to deal with you. Then, that at that point becomes a business decision that you need to make. And that's fine. Either decision is appropriate, but I think you have to recognize there's a difference between performing work in, that is not going to measure up to some kind of a minimum standard, as compared to something that's going to take me more time than I had planned on, but I can still do an appropriate job in completing the assignment. And neither one of those are fun situations, but at some point you have to make a decision on what is going to be in your best interest.
So there, basically what you're saying is there comes a time when you've got to recognize that client X is just a complete pain in the neck and you got to dump them.
That happens. And I think, it probably happens to everybody at some point. We occasionally do some litigation work, and, you find quickly the attorneys that, or those parties that, just aren't worth doing work for. They end up causing you more aggravation than not. And, but yeah, we've got to make sure that we're finding those people who we have a good relationship with, and it makes sense from a business standpoint to deal with.
Graig, please let me thank you for your time and your expertise and your efforts and your good attitude and your smile. I appreciate it. Our viewers appreciate it. The real estate appraisal industry appreciates it. And we've got there is a conference coming up in the not terribly distant future, and we hope to see a lot of appraisers there at the Appraisal Summit in November of 2021. And if you're watching this after November 2021, thank you for watching it. You missed it, and we hope to see you at the next one. Oh, Craig, again, let me thank you. Let me extend my best to your family, and I look forward to the next time we get to chat.
Thanks, Tim. It's been enjoyable, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Bye-bye.